let me just jump in, because I know we probably have similar questions. After Adam sins, this is part of the narrative arc here. After Adam sins, all of his children have to live with this awful gift that Adam gives them, that he has won for them, which is the knowledge of good and evil. Remember that? So now everybody born has this knowledge of good and evil. So his kids, all of them, all of his descendants, all human beings now, will always have an intimate knowledge of evil. We were joking around the other day, like Adam's the only person that couldn't blame all his problems on his parents, you know. He couldn't say it was how I was raised, you know. But everyone else could, from this point on, do that. Every generation that passes now will also lose the memory of paradise. It's like every generation that passes is like distance from the time when we were in paradise, when we walked with God, when we knew God as our Father. And then in Cain and Abel, in that story, we see the introduction of sin into human society. So we talked about the fall. Stacy talked about the fall, and John talked about the fall as its ramifications for community, for human society, and that fallout. It means that now violence enters into human society and death enters into human society. We kill each other. And then, of course, in Cain, you have what becomes sort of the arch nemesis of the people of God in the story of Genesis, the Canaanites, and you have like his descendants become the people that are far from God, that have forgotten God, and that try to find a way to explain the world in terms that don't include God as creator or father. And then some of Adam's kids will try to remember, and that's preserved in the person of Seth, who is a kind of replacement for Abel. Seth is sort of, it actually says that he was made in Adam's likeness, so he's sort of reminded you of Adam. Seth is a replacement. Of course, Adam lived 900 years, so he would have had so many children, and yet we only know of or think of Seth as his primary son because he's really replacing Abel in the story. And actually, if you look at the genealogy of someone like Luke, so in Luke's gospel, Matthew doesn't do this. Matthew just goes back, I think, to David. But in Luke's genealogy, he goes all the way back to Adam, and then he refers to Adam. This is in reference to your question about who are the sons of God. He refers to, remember he says that, and then Seth the son of Adam, and Adam the son of God. Who's the progenitor? So if we're doing that with the genealogy all the way back, where do we go after Adam? And what Luke does as a historian, he says, well, then there was Seth, who was the son of Adam, and then there was Adam, who was the son of God, I guess. God is the one who willed him to be. God is the one who was his father. Now that's important. It means that the people of the earth are now split between two kinds of people. Those who remember that God is their father, and those who only know a man as their father. You follow me? So now there's a line of people who could trace back their lineage to God through Seth, through Adam, to God. And they remember that. They remember that we are human beings, yes. But, once we weren't, once we were created from nothing, out of the dust of the earth, we come from a supernatural God who created everything that we see. And those people who remember that, those people, that very small line of people, going back, sort of plotting their heritage back through Seth, I believe, at least in this point in time in history, were referred to as sons of God. These were the children of God. And then everyone else who isn't in that line, which is everyone else who isn't from that clan, that tribe, would have been referred to as the children of men. And this is part of what we see here in this early text. There's nothing mystical about it. There's no demagogues or anything like that. These are people that are saying, these are the descendants of Seth, who come directly from Adam, who come directly from God. And they sort of had this status as a clan, as being, we are the children of God. We are the sons of God. We are the clan of God. Who is our father? God was our father. And they remembered that. They were special in the sense that they remembered that they came from God, whereas everyone else didn't. You know, Adam's like 200th son didn't feel as special as Seth. Can you follow me on that? He wasn't, it wasn't as significant. And so that created these sort of two parts. There were children of heaven and children of earth. And that creates this dynamic here. And then the unthinkable happens. Those who trace their lineage to God, those people in the line of Seth who are supposed to remember God, they abandon God. They begin to forget him. And they look at the daughters of men, the daughters who don't come from the Seth line, don't come from the clan of Adam. They just look at everyone else and they say, you know what, forget this whole God thing. Let's just be people. Let's just be human beings. And they marry outside of that line of memory. The children of God marry the children of men. And the result is, now this is important, this is why Noah's story comes right after this. The result is that no one remembers God anymore. But that's lost completely. And the result is violence and evil beyond our comprehension. And I mean that. The world that's being described here is not the same as our world. Don't think, well, there's violence in our world, so it's the same. No, you don't understand the scope and the pervasiveness and the utter irredeemable span of this kind of violence and evil that exists in this time. Completely unredeemable. And another result, which is interesting, is that these people, the original sort of like the Sethites and the daughters of men, they marry, and then they create this strange race of people. Which again, the Nephilim come back up again in Numbers 13. When they go spy out the land and they come back and like those people are giants. They're special people. They become this group of people that come out of those two clans, the sons of God and the daughters of men. Any children born to them are given this sort of strange hero status in the world, and it's a problem. Because Nephilim, no one really knows what the word means, but the closest Hebrew verb is the word to fall. They are the fallen. They're the ones that were once from the line of God, all the way back, remembering that God was their father. And now they create this new race of heroes, a new group of people that we admire, that we are afraid of, that we follow, that become the heroes of old, and they are the fallen. Think about that. Guys, when the fallen become our heroes, there is no hope for us. And this is just on an aside. By the way, I'm not a prude. I think it's fine for you to watch movies or listen to secular music. I do. It's not a problem. Just because I do doesn't make it right. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There's beauty and truth there. And look for God when you go to the cinema or whatever. But I just want to say this as an aside. Woe to you. Isaiah said, woe to you who call evil good and good evil, who call darkness light and light darkness, who call bitter sweet and sweet bitter. There's a problem that I see that some of you have where you go to a movie and say, I love that movie, or I love that character, I love that show. And I'm wondering to myself, what exactly about it do you love? Because so much of the things that we say we love, be careful what you say you love. Because when the fallen become our heroes, we are lost. And so back to this world, they don't care anymore about the earth. They don't care anymore about the value of life or the image of God in each other. They have forgotten that completely. And there is only violence. Did you notice how many times the word violence occurs in this text? And there it is, God regrets creating them. And he is sad, grieved. Can you imagine that? I think there's a way we view God, which is there's actually a doctrine called the impassibility of God, that God has no emotions. I think it's completely unbiblical. And texts like this, they fly in the face of the idea that God has no emotion. Because here he is deeply feeling, grieving. I remember growing up Presbyterian. Did anybody grow up in a Presbyterian? Anyway, don't admit it. You wouldn't anyway. You're just going to sit there quietly. I grew up in a Presbyterian church, and by the way, I have tremendous honor for that church in particular. I mean, my own family probably owes our relationship to God to that church, so only love. But I remember even being very young and being in that context, and everybody was always so composed. Everybody was always so straight-faced, no emotion. Presbyterians don't show emotion. It's like a joke they have with each other. It's like, lawyers tell lawyer jokes and Presbyterians tell Presbyterian jokes. It's fine. And they're the frozen chosen and whatever, and they understand that about themselves. And I'm not okay with that. If you know that's true about yourself, do something about it. But I remember everybody was always so composed. And I remember thinking, like, the content of what we wrestled with was so, had so much gravity to it, and yet there were never tears. Never shouts of joy, never any expression of emotion at all. Where is the awe? Where is the joy? Where is the emotion? The realities that life elicits is emotion. Everything we experience that has value or meaning to us, we experience it emotionally. I'm not saying you should only experience life through emotion, but it's a part of how God made us. It's actually a part of the reflection of the image of God here. And yet, in that experience, in that sort of church world, it was vacant from the church. And it just made me feel like this can't be real. And I never questioned whether God was real, but I questioned whether that was real. And those people were real. And that version, that form of church or worship was real. Or maybe it was just a funeral for God. That crossed my mind. Even as a young man, I thought maybe this is just a funeral for God. A God who once was and who has since passed away and gone, and now we sit in reverent silence, remembering the God who is long dead. And so we sit in reverence, not really sad for what we've done, but not really happy either. And in the purgatory of that emotionless religion, I knew, even as a very young man, I knew this is wrong. This cannot be right. God is fire. God is life and beauty and passionate love and creativity and jealousy. This is the God that Scripture reveals. And He's troubling. He's hard to understand. He's mysterious, but He's good. And He's sad when we aren't. And He's gracious when we aren't. And He makes us, and He's just. And He will judge us, and He is fierce. God is fierce. And dangerous and kind, but kind in a way like a bear is kind to you if you're sitting with a bear. Such a kind, gentle bear, but every moment he does not knock your head off your body, you're thankful. You recognize that that's a very real possibility at any moment. I remember being on the Blue Ridge Parkway, by the way, and we saw some bears, and I was like, my dad used to take me in the woods, and I sort of grew up around animals, so I'm not scared of them, and so I just saw bears, and so we jumped out, and I walked over these bears, and they were like, didn't run away, and so I kept walking towards them, and they kept being there, not moving, and I kept walking towards them, and all of a sudden I was, what am I doing? And I got within, from that speaker to me, from these bears, and then this bear stood up in front of me, and I was like, almost peed myself. And then I'm like, do you run? It's that moment where do you run? What do you do? I don't think you should run. I remember that somewhere, like in a Winnie the Pooh book or something. You're not supposed to run. They look so cute, like you just want to go over and cuddle them, but no. I remember the Garden of Gethsemane where Jesus, who is the incarnation of God, sits in that garden in the depths of it where he falls on his face and he's overwhelmed, he said, my soul is overwhelmed with grieving and sorrow. And it's got to be so utterly unsettling for the three of his closest friends who have never seen him weak, who understand him to be indomitable, who have seen him face every kind of enemy, every kind of sickness, disease, evil in the world, and he's never shrunk back. And here he is, he can barely hold himself up. He falls onto his face and he's overwhelmed. The God who made the world is overwhelmed. And it shakes us to our theological core. And what is it that Jesus is grieving? What is it that he's regretting? What is it that he's saying to his Father, please, there has to be another way? Is it the cross? This is something my house church wrestled with this last week. Is it the cross that he doesn't want? Is it the cross that he's saying, let this cup pass? No, that can't be it. Jesus is not so weak that he would run away from an execution. He's strong enough to handle that. It's the separation of God that he's about to experience, where there's a breach between him and his Father, and he's thinking to himself, there has to be another way, but there isn't another way. And so he does what only God can do. He has the strength, the courage, the internal fortitude, the integrity to do what must be done, even though it will cause him great pain. And there is sadness in God. And by the way, before you get indignant about the summary death of all the people living on the earth at the time, I just want to point out that, at least for me, in reading this text, the greater judgment is the judgment that happens in, I think it's verse 3, where he says, my spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The greater judgment in this text is not the flood. It is the choice to give human beings 120 years. Because before this, we're looking at people that live 900 years. And think about that. Every 120 years now, from that point on, God decided, I'm going to purge the earth. Not one time with the flood, but every 120 years, I'm going to get rid of all of you. No one's going to live more than 120 years. Because here's what had happened. The longer people lived, the more wicked they became. It's like we're just getting started with evil. And he actually just curtails it. He says, you know what, no one's going to live old enough to be able to be this evil, for their heart to grow this dark, this cold, this callous, this violent. But we don't really have a problem with this span of 120 years because it's what we're used to, right? I mean, for someone to live 120 years, you'd feel like, man, that dude made it. You know, I mean, that dude, he rocked life. You know what I mean? Nobody would be crying at a dude's funeral after 120, am I right? You wouldn't be like, why, God? Why did you take him from us? You know, no one that he knew would even be alive anymore. Have you ever known anyone that's truly old, truly old? They get to the point where, like, I don't know anyone anymore. I need to move on from this world. Think about that. There has never been, if we move back 120 years ago today, there wouldn't be a single person alive today who was alive then. The whole world has been purged of that generation completely. And it will be from ours. And 120 years from now, none of us will exist. None of us, we will all be stricken, all be wiped from the earth. Every 120 years, there is this renewal, this sort of wiping away of one generation, so that if you blew it, then the next one gets a chance. And we only get 120 years to either screw it up or to do well. Always the population is being decimated and replaced with a new one. Every generation sees it. But we are here now. We're a new generation, and we've been handed both creation and its story. We have, our 120 years, we have been handed that. We are humanity's 1,000th chance. And when you think of it that way, you begin to realize the graciousness of God, the kindness of God, the perseverance of God, the long-suffering of God. He just keeps giving our people, our race, a chance. Over and over and over and over again. Life begins in Adam, and then it begins again in Noah, and it begins again in Jesus, and it begins again now in us. At first blush, I thought this story was about judgment, but it really isn't. It's a story about a crisis inside of God. It's a story about the suffering of God and how he deals with it. This strange thing that happens in the heart of God, regret. And does that mean that God made a mistake or sees his choice to create human beings as a mistake? I remember I had an old man who years ago used to come to my house church. And I remember he was fond of saying, "I have no regrets." I remember him saying that. Some of you may have said that in your life, but he would say, he was a very old man, he would say, "I have no regrets." Now this is a man who was estranged from his daughter, who was unemployed, who had, to my knowledge, very few friends. But he would say, I regret nothing in my life. And I remember thinking, being so struck by that, so shaken by that statement, and thinking, I don't know that I've ever heard anything more arrogant in my life. You see, if God is capable of regret, then it is a part of perfection. I want you to think about that. If God is capable of regret, then it is a part of perfection. Not regret like we do. So when we regret, typically what we regret or why we regret is because we have failed or sinned or erred in some way. This obviously does not apply to God. But the regret, we do sometimes, in the way that God does, we do sometimes regret or feel something similar to what he feels here. It's what we feel when we do something that we know is right or good, but we know it will hurt. We regret having to do it, but we wouldn't do it any other way. It's like spanking my kids, although sometimes I want to spank my kids. But when I don't, when I do it because they need it. I imagine it to be like a paramedic setting your broken arm. They regret having to do it, but they have to do it, and they do. Or a surgeon cutting off your gangrenous leg. They regret having to do it, but they have the courage to do it anyway. It means that he regrets or laments something that he chose to do. But then why do it? And this is like a super important theological reality. God chooses courses of action he knows will result in his own pain and suffering. He chooses to do something because it's right, because it's good, because it is the better course, even though he knows it will cause him pain. The word there, the Hebrew word grief, which he applies to himself, the grief, the sorrow that he feels, is the same word that he chose. The last time we see this word in the text is when he's talking about the woman who will have pain in childbearing. He's saying, I have that kind of pain for the children that I've borne. If you've ever had to make a hard decision, then you understand this kind of regret. But the most astounding thing about this text is not the flood, but it's the insight into God's heart, his pathos, his passion. And this is the thing. I bet you that if I were to ask you when you walked in here, if I would have said, God destroyed the world in a flood, do you know that? And you would say, yes, I remember that story. And I would say, why? What was he feeling when he destroyed the world? I bet you 75% of you would have said he was angry. But that's not in the story. We read anger into the story. It is not there. The primary emotion that drives God is sadness, not anger. He is not angry at you. He was not angry at this violence. He was sad, and that's an important distinction in the pathos of God. The evil, angry, evil heart of humankind is contrasted with the saddened, good, and pure heart of God. And this is a story about heart seeing hearts. As Walter Brueggemann puts it, he says, the crisis is not the judgment of water, it is the crisis of the internal grief of God whose heart knows our hearts. And he's wrestling with what he sees inside of us. And the text says that there's violence in their hearts, and this is what most troubles God. Imagine if I have a party. I throw a party and I invite you all, or I invite just some of you. I invite you. And I imagine this party is going to be great, and it's going to be at my house, and I set the house up, and I do everything I can to make it a great experience. You're all invited. I invite you in love and with expectation. I set the table with all of the best things. I imagine and plan and will that there will be joy and fun, and I imagine all the things that we'll do together, and then you all come. And it's good for a while, and then it starts to get out of hand. You ever been at a party like this? In fact, I remember being in high school, the goal of a party was for it to get busted. Do you remember that? That was a party hit its stride when it got busted. No, you don't remember that? They would send me out because I'd be the only sober one at the party, and I would go speak to the police. But the thing just keeps getting out of hand. People start fighting. This is at my house. People start fighting with each other, punching each other. Then they start killing each other. Can you imagine? It's blood everywhere in my house. Then they look for children. They start raping the children. They're destroying the house. They're destroying each other until there's no one left alive but the worst culprits. I would regret having that party. Not because it's wrong to have a party. Not because it was wrong to love you or invite you. Not because it was wrong to will something good for you. Not because it was wrong to invite you into a relationship with me. But I would regret that this has happened, and I would regret the thing that I must now do, which is end the party. I shut it down. You see, the creation is out of control and it must be stopped. And this is what's happening in this text. It's not becoming what he willed it to become and what he made it to be. And let's be clear, this is not a frustration that God has with people lying or even like idol worship. This is about violence, wholesale destruction of the world that he created and everything in it, all of its people. And it has to be stopped or God is not good. It has to be stopped or God is not good. So we shut the party down. It's the only moral thing to do. You shut the party down. You stop the party. But there is one person who does not take part in the melee. One friend who, maybe it was you, who weren't killing people and weren't destroying things and were looking around with me saying, what is happening? Maybe standing by me, protecting me. One who cared about the house and the people who were being killed. And in Noah, there is hope that the rift between creator and creation is not lost. There is one who is obedient. There is one who stays his life in line with the vision of God for him, to be a creature created and loved. He remembers this. And to some degree, we live in a world like that. We live in a world gone crazy, gone wild. Not as bad as this, perhaps, but full of violence and murder and abuse and oppression and exploitation. And that we have to ask the question. This is a question that this text begs, but it's a question that I think we have to ask. What holds God back? What stops him from doing it again? What is currently holding God back? You see, God says in this text that he will destroy everything, the whole earth. But strictly speaking, he does not do that. And the reason he does not do that is because of this one person and his family. Because there's one who is faithful. Because there's one who's submitted. Because there's one who isn't afraid to just be a creature under God's care. And that one is enough to save the planet. To keep our line, our race going. One man preserves the planet. One family keeps our race alive. So that we could start again. What if the same thing holds him back now? This picture of the one righteous family. I think this is a picture of the church, of a generation of Noahs who build arks in the middle of coming floods, who believe God and try to save all they can. Why do we live and work for the poor? Why have we planted our lives in the hardest soil? Because we hold out hope that it can be saved. We're the ones who don't give up. We're the ones who don't give in. We are the church. We're defiant against violence. We walk towards our own cross, driven into the city's hardest places and most desperate people. We care for the poor. Guys, by the way, the underground, this is very frustrating to me. Underground, it's not a theological distinctive that we care for the poor. It's not something we're into. It's not a trend. This is basic. It is essential. Because it is an act of protest against evil and an act of faith in the potency of the cross and the hope of redemption. We always go where the world is darkest because we believe that God can redeem this world. And when we hide in our cush buildings, in our life of luxury, and when we gather ourselves together in our monolithic churches, we lie about the power of God. And we run from our identity as redeemers and as purveyors of that one truth that God is able to save what is left in this world. We have been given the mission of Jesus to seek and save. Several chapters from now, we'll read about this fascinating exchange between Abraham and God, pleading for Sodom. Of course, you remember Sodom is another great story of judgment, just a wicked city that gets decimated, annihilated because it's so bad. And there's Abraham saying to God, yeah, but God, what if there were 50 righteous people? Remember this conversation between Abraham and God? But God, what if there were 50? And God says, yeah, if there was 50, I probably wouldn't do it. And okay, what if there were 30? Yeah, for 30, I wouldn't do it. What if there were 20? Remember this? Crazy. He's like, forgive me, God, that I would even ask you, but what about 10? He finally gets down to 10. What about 10? Interesting enough, that's where the story stops, 10. 10. 10 is the number. Somehow, for some reason, if there's 10 people in a city, pure, totally wicked, disgustingly, horrifically wicked, but if there are 10 righteous, God will hold back judgment. Think about that. Incidentally enough, this becomes the model, the motif for how a synagogue is then planted for the rest of time in Jewish society. If you don't plant a synagogue until you have 10 believing people. It was actually 10 believing men. If you had 10 believing men, you started a synagogue. And there's a connection here between that and the idea that that synagogue could then hold back judgment, the wrath of God from that place. Interesting enough, if you look at places like Luke 10, where Jesus is asking his disciples to go into unbelieving cities, unknowing cities, and say to them, hey, I'm here with good news, peace, rest upon you, and here is the kingdom has now come near you. He says in Luke 10:10, when you enter a town and are not welcomed, so they reject you, and you go into the streets and you say, even the dust of this town we wipe from our feet as a warning to you, be sure of this, the kingdom of God has come near. And I tell you, it will be more bearable for you on that day than for Sodom, than for your town. More bearable for Sodom than for your town because you rejected us. Think about that. These people that Jesus sends into this unbelieving place, they say, hey, the kingdom is here. And they say, get out of here. We don't want you. Throw you out. And they say, man, it is better for you to be Sodom than what you're about to be if you kick us out. Whoever listens to you listens to me, he said. Whoever rejects you rejects me. But whoever rejects me rejects him who sent me. Receiving the few righteous people is connected to your redemption, to our prosperity, even to the continuing ability to draw breath. People, you don't realize how significant you are when you place yourself in dark, difficult places. You don't realize the role that you're playing in bringing the grace of God to that place and holding back his judgment. We've had some problems recently because, the Well, the microchurch that works primarily with the homeless, and because we're moving out of the other hub, we've kind of given them the run of that building. And so more and more homeless people are coming there, resting there, charging their cell phones, getting some food, getting some help, just taking like a load off. Well, anyway, Ybor City hates it, hates us, hates homeless people. I think it's fair to say that. There are certain officials, city officials, and I'm saying this, I'm going for it. There are certain city officials, I'm not going to name names, but I will if need to, who have kept putting pressure on us, kept showing up at our space and saying, listen, you need to get these homeless people out of here. They cannot be here. We don't want them here. The problem, of course, is that whenever we open our doors, if they open their doors at 10, people show up at 9. They come early. If we open our doors at 8, they'll show up at 7. If we open our doors at 7, they'll come at 6. There's always going to be some people waiting to get in, and that's the problem. They're sitting on benches, which I thought that's what benches were for. Apparently not. They're sitting on benches, and they're just being unwanted. And because of that reason, now we're getting all this pressure, like tremendous pressure, like you need to get these people out of here. You need to not do what you're doing. And this most recently escalated to the point where a city official came in and said, listen, I'm sure there is something you're doing here that's illegal or breaking a code, and I'm going to come find it, and we're going to get you out of here. We're coming for you. We're coming for you. Now, to this point, I've tried to play nice and tried to say anything we can do. We've tried so many things. The truth is, a lot of the people that are hanging out on the street, we don't know them. Just because a person's homeless doesn't mean they're friends with us and doesn't mean they're even coming inside our building. But now every single homeless person that walks on 7th Avenue is somehow our responsibility, our fault. We brought them there somehow. And I hate to break it to people, but there were homeless people in Ybor City before we got here. And the difference, of course, is that we see homelessness as a problem to be combated. We see it as an evil to be dealt with. And the truth is, they are doing things like going to the bathroom on sides of buildings, so we let them inside to go to the bathroom. What's the problem here? Instead of laying out on the street, we want to bring them inside and let them in. We're trying to help. We're trying to actually bring something helpful to the problem, and then we're the ones being driven out. So this is what I heard recently. There was a commission meeting or something. Everyone got together and they talk about us. They love to talk about us. It reminds me of high school when all the teachers would be in the teachers' lounge talking about me. You know, oh, Brian is a problem, and they decide they're coming for us. You know, they're gonna drive us out. They're gonna find some illegality or something. And it's probably not that hard. But you know what I want to say to them? I want to say, be careful. Be careful who you drive out. And we may end up being the ones rejected. We may end up being the ones driven out. But we are also the ones who are obedient. We are Noah for Ybor City. And so we stay. And not just for our own ends or for our own lives, but we stay for you. Well, I want to say to them, we're here and we're not going anywhere. And we're going to fight you for you. Because something in your heart wants to grow dark towards those human beings that you're afraid of, that you don't understand. That you're never more than 1 or 2 paychecks being exactly where they are. Or 1 mental breakdown from being exactly where they are. Or 1 addiction from being exactly where they are. And something in their heart wants to hate them. Something in their heart wants to make a decision about those people and completely write them off, completely abandon them as human beings, just demonize them utterly. And we stand opposed to that for them. We stand there in between the two worlds and we say, you can't do that, and we won't let you do that, and you're going to have to fight with us. Not just for their dignity, but for your very soul. Because as soon as you start doing that, as soon as you do that kind of mental violence to that group of people, you lose your own humanity. And for your own sake, we will resist you. And so we stay. And we preserve the city. We are salt in Ybor City. And we hold back the decay, and we hold back the wrath of God. You don't want to just write these people off. You don't want to drive the few people of God left in Ybor City out. You don't want that. You think you do, but you really don't. And in turn, we are buying time for you to repent and to return to the God who made you. We hold back decay. And by the way, it's not easy. And we're yelling at them all the time too. We're fighting with them, and we're fighting with everybody. We have no home, you see. I mean, nobody is more frustrated than John with the stuff that we're trying to do with them. It's like, stop pooping on the sidewalk. We hate that too. We're not like we love it when people poop on the sidewalk. We just love that. We encourage it, and why can't Ybor City enjoy that? You know, no, we hate it too. But it's why we need to open up our buildings so there's toilets to use. It's why we need to show basic hospitality and humanity towards other people. And if we're the only people that are going to open up our toilets, then please don't kick us out. That's a few less turds that are out there. We are the protest against the worst things that tears at the fabric of our beloved community. We keep the protests alive inside of us and outside of us. I read this very interesting thing about these protests, these sort of little uprisings that were happening in Iraq years ago. And part of what the U.S. military had to do was deal with these little, protests that would simmer and then emerge. And they always followed the same sort of pattern, where a few people would begin sort of gathering, yelling something or kind of getting themselves worked up, and then more people would gather, and then more people would gather, and you needed time, and you needed the thing to brew, so it became like a full-on protest. And they were trying to figure out, man, how are we going to stop the protest? And I think essentially I want to reverse the image for a minute for you. What I'm saying is we're part of the protest against evil. We're part of what says, we're not just going to give in to our selfish desires. We're not just going to give in to our lusts, but we're going to fight against it. If that's part of what the church is going to do. Well, part of what they realize is that because it took so long for these things to sort of bubble up, to boil over, it took so long that people needed kebab stands. Part of what made the thing work was their food vendors would come in. So a little thing started simmering, and then people started getting mad, and then more people come, and then they get hungry, and they need like a food vendor. And so the food vendors would show up, and they'd eat a kebab and get back in there and go for it. So, and actually at Kofa City, which is maybe about 100 miles south of Baghdad, one major decided, you know what, I don't know that we can stop these protests, but what we'll do is, what if we just took the kebab stands away? What if we refused access to food in the middle of the protest? They said, hey, let's try that. And it started to happen. There would be like a little thing would begin to simmer, and people get mad, and then a few more would come, they'd get hungry, and they'd just leave. They'd go home. And there was never any protests in Kofa City because the kebab stands were gone. You know where I'm going with this. We are the kebab stands. Keeping the protest alive. And the truth is, if any little community of people says, man, I don't think I like this. I think I want to resist this. I think this is kind of wrong. We show up with our kebabs. We're there immediately. Let's keep talking about that. Let's keep that going. We want to comfort those that are resisting evil. That's part of the work of the church. The world doesn't succumb then because we're there feeding it, because we're holding out against it, because we offer another way in the midst of despair. We claim there is hope. You take us out, you stop the fight. You may seem, your little group may seem inconsequential, but it isn't. You aren't. I know of a woman that some of you are in a relationship with who has 10 kids, and her 10 kids have recently been taken away from her because of some problems and violations, and she's trying to work this plan to maybe get her kids back, but in the meantime, her 10 children have just been sort of scattered, and many of you have taken in some of those kids. But there's 3 left, 3 girls who now had to be put into some sort of facility, the 3 oldest, I think 13, 11, and 7, I think, the 3 oldest girls. And they need a home. They need somebody, maybe someone even here right now within the sound of my voice. God will quicken you, and you should say yes, and you should come find me afterwards, and you should say, you can come stay with me for as long as need be. And many of you have already done that. You've already said yes to that, either those kids or other kids, and this is part of what it means to be, Underground is part of what it means to be the church. And I ask you a question. If one of you did that today, if one of you said, you know what, I'll do that, I'll take those 3 little girls into my home. If you did that, would that not hold back evil just a little? I'm not talking about hyperbole here. I'm talking about reality. For those 3 little girls, in the lives of those 3 sisters, so that they could stay together, would that not hold back some evil? In the heart of that mother hoping to be reunited one day with her children, would that not hold back some evil? The other day I was at Joanne Fabrics, I'm embarrassed to say, and by the way, I know now how it feels to be a woman at Home Depot. super, super chauvinistic place to go shop. And I've been with women at Home Depot and said, go get this tool, this thing. And the woman will go off and ask someone for help, and they just condescend the crap out of that woman. Like, what are you talking about? There's no such thing. And then I'll walk over and be like, the thing? And they'll be like, yeah, sir, sorry, right here. And I just realized, wow, there's such gender inequality in Home Depot. I'm like, it must be really hard to be a woman in Home Depot. Am I right? Can I get an amen, women? But before you start feeling superior, I went to Joann Fabrics and was totally condescended by these women in the store. Does this fabric, like, how do you cut it, or what's the, it says it on the back, like idiot, And I literally said to this woman, I'm like, listen, I'm new here. I don't know what I'm doing. If you could be gentle, that'd be great. I was scared. Anyway, maybe I was so shaken by the whole thing. I go out to my car, and I leave my briefcase. I have a Jeep, so I can't lock it, so I have to carry my briefcase everywhere I go. So if I go into a store, I can't just leave it in my car. I have to take it with me everywhere I go. So I drive it around in my car. It's like my baby. So I go out, I unload whatever's in the cart, and I leave the briefcase in the cart, and I leave. I take off. This is like, where's Joann Fabrics? Brandon or something? Super far away. Like a billion miles away. So I leave my briefcase in a parking lot. And I don't realize it till I'm far, I don't know, maybe all the way home, almost all the way back. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And of course it has like, my tablet in it. It's got like all my stuff, whatever. So I'm like, okay. Freaking out here. I need my briefcase to be there. So where do I turn? To whom do I turn? Did somebody just say Joann Fabrics? What is that? No, I turn to God. This is the only person that can help me in this situation. Gosh. Anyway. I realized something in this moment where I'm worried about my bag. I'm worried about my briefcase. I realized that God is there. It's something about the theology of omnipresence, that God is actually there in that parking lot. I'm not, but He is. It's like I have a friend there, and actually He knows other people. And so I asked Him, I had a very specific prayer. I'm like, Lord, if you could send one of your people to grab my bag, that'd be super helpful. Before one of the other kinds of people grabs my bag. So I had a kind of wave of peace come over me, and I get back, and I'm hoping it's just still sitting there in the cart, So I pull back in the parking lot, and it isn't there. And I see this other guy, he's sort of in it, looking shady in his van or whatever, his like conversion van or something. I was like looking at him, he's looking at me, and I'm like, did you steal my bag? And he's like, did you leave your bag? I'm like, yeah, I did. He's like, somebody came and took it. I was like, gosh, seriously? So I go inside Joann Fabrics, and there's this woman standing there holding it. She's like, is this your bag? She's just waiting for me. And it's like, I know God has people everywhere. God is there, He's present in the world, but He's not just there inside me, but He's inside of others. He's free and functioning in the world, and it changes things. It changes the world. It makes the world somehow better. It doesn't just have to be all violence and stealing and hatred. It can be sometimes people preserving your things for you, looking out for you, doing something virtuous. I mean, what if there was no one there to watch it? What if there was no one there that He could send? But it's not true. He has people everywhere, and He holds the world together with those people. More than you could ever possibly understand. Listen very carefully to me. Where there is the church, the people of God, where they are there is love. And where there is love, I mean really the church, really the people of God, there is love. And where there is love, there is virtue. And whenever there is virtue, it keeps alive hope. Hope lives on when there is virtue. And when there is hope, there is industry. And where there is industry, there is innovation. And where there's innovation, there is creativity. And where there is creativity, there is always art. And where there is art, there is always beauty. And where there is beauty, there is awe. And anytime there is awe, it is only God alone standing, waiting, wanting to be known. Some people have rejected the good news, turned up their nose at the church because we're not showing the church true beauty, a virtue of a life well lived and a community well lived. I want to begin to close. I'm going to actually ask somebody that works for me, Kelly or something, could you just ask them to be quiet out there for a minute, just the last few minutes, and then if Emily and the musicians want to start making their way up. What are we showing the world? Is it true beauty? I read a story about a cleaning lady, an Italian cleaning lady who threw away some modern art by accident. It's like 15,000 euro piece of art, it was like after a show and she saw it and she threw it away. And I think that's funny. In her defense, you know what the piece was? It was broken cookies scattered on the floor. That's garbage. That's not art. That's actually garbage. I mean, that was the piece. That was the art. Is that the best we can do? Are we so far from Eden that we think that's beauty? I mean, look, if the cleaning lady can't recognize it as art, maybe it isn't. I mean, that's like a test for art. If the cleaning lady sees it and wants to throw it away, it's not good. Some people are turning their noses up at church, not because the church itself is somehow weak, but because the version of it, the form of it, is not beautiful. And is what we're showing the world, is it truly beautiful? Is it virtue and the art of a life lived in the way it's supposed to be lived? Do our communities remind the world of creation, of the first days of the world and the artistry of God? Because they should. They should be visceral, staggering, in composition beautiful, in texture beautiful, in contrast beautiful, in the use of light on darkness beautiful, in balance and symmetry beautiful. Whatever criteria you use to consider art, we should also use to consider the church. We are the memory of the first 7 days. We are the sons and daughters of God. We are supposed to remember Him and love Him. We're supposed to hold back the floods of judgment. And for that reason, we need to be in the most violent places, fighting that violence with love, but also fighting for the violent, for the sake of the violated, and holding back the wrath of God. This is the ministry of Jesus Christ. It's the ministry of the cross. And the same Jesus has said, if anyone would come after me, they must take up their own cross to follow me. It is our ministry. We are His body, His bride, His church. And what I find fascinating is that these people, these Nephilim, these fallen heroes, they are also like us. See, it's not that being fallen, that's not the problem. We are all fallen. Noah was fallen. The problem is just realizing that our fall has not resulted in our death, but in our life. That somehow in that impossible scenario, we have all fallen, and yet God caught us. God saved us. God has cradled us. Did you see the story of the 16-year-old Texas girl who for her birthday, her dad got her a solo skydiving flight of parachute. She could do a solo, jump out of this plane at 16, and she did. And at 3,500 feet, her chute did not open. Mackenzie Witherington, 16-year-old, jumps out of a plane on her birthday, and her chute does not open. This is a picture, I think, of us. You see, whatever plan you had for your life, we are all descending from heaven to earth. And the ground is rushing up at us. And whatever plan you had, whatever chute you thought would open and save you, it is now pulled and there's nothing there. It's flapping in the wind. And this really is the question of life. The only thing that separates us as believers from the world that does not believe is that we recognize, the chute is not opened. And in that moment, we turn to someone else. Now, this girl blacked out. Her chute doesn't open. She blacks out completely. She said that she knew something was wrong. And she hits the ground. Her chute doesn't open. 3,500 feet to the ground. She hits the ground. But she survived. I just saw an interview with her. She wheeled her out now. She had a broken bone, broken back, broken ribs, broken neck. But she's okay. The doctors say she's going to make a full recovery, and they have no explanation of how or why that is even possible. Sometimes your chute doesn't open and you don't die. What the heck do you do with that? I love it. This 16-year-old girl said, you know what she said? She said, every day I pray now. Every day. Because who do you thank for that? She said, every day I pray and I thank God for saving my life. Is this what it means to be Christian? Every day I thank God. And she said, I want to be better. That's what she said. She said, I realize that I'm allowed to live a little longer and I want to live better. Guys, your plan didn't work. You fell. But you're alive anyway. God has saved your life. And you may not even walk straight again. Some of you hit the ground so hard. You're not right in the head, you know. There is some brain damage. But you're alive. And you can thank God for that. And as I said last week, in the creation story, it's clear that we belong to Him because He made us, but it's also clear that we belong to Him because He saved our lives. We are doubly His. We are twice His. And there is only one response to that. It is to give ourselves back to Him, to say, thank you for saving my life. And in view of that, I ask you this morning, can you commit again to being salt and light in the world? To holding back evil and proclaiming Jesus to those who only know violence? Will you commit again to the hard places and the hard people, knowing that you have the heart, the same heart as God, because He gave it to you and He is close to you? I love that even in this story of despair and grief and regret, God is looking for someone to save. He's looking for a reason to be gracious and generous. We will all fall. We all have fallen. But He wants to catch us. On the night He was betrayed, Jesus, after giving thanks, broke bread and He said, "This is my body, which is broken for you. Eat it to remember me." And in the same way, after supper, He took the cup and He said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is shed to forgive sin." We have all fallen, and this table reminds us that we have all been caught. If you want to, He will catch you. He will restore. He'll engineer your recovery. And your life can be like this girl's life, where people just say, "What happened to you? How are you alive?" And you can thank God for that. Will you just bow your head for a moment, and before you come to this table, will you ask God to just speak, whisper in your ear something He wants you to hear? As dark as it can feel at times, there is hope. This story reminds us that God wants to hold back judgment. He's looking for any reason, anybody. Just give him a reason this morning. Give him a reason to come back into your life. Give him a reason. Offer yourself to him. Give him a reason to care about your neighborhood. Give him a reason to care about your workplace. Give him a reason to hold back judgment from the people that you love, your family, the people that you're called to and committed to. Will you guys be Noah for your little place in the world? When you're ready, guys, come forward. This is the body and blood of Jesus given for you.